Okay, so today I would like to talk about the subject of burnout, but I want to do so, excuse me, my face is in the way, but I want to do so in the context of how bureaucracy affects burnout. And this is a paper written by two physicians out of the University of Florida in 2018. And in one of their opening lines, they say that bureaucratization, and we'll read here together, is one of the most important causes of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and inefficacy affecting health professionals. And I think those three words, those three adjectives, perfectly define what it is when somebody is experiencing burnout. That's the personification of burnout. Now, to define burnout, they use the sociologist Max Weber, and to define bureaucracy, it's a rational system of organizing large-scale human activity with the goal to reduce inefficiency. And that's important, especially in something like a dental school, like a hospital, insurance companies. If you had thousands of individuals operating independently of one another, it would be, in theory, a logistical nightmare. But in practice, bureaucratization may actually cause a lot more distaste and inefficiencies than maybe it helps solve. And Max Weber further goes on to say here, and in this paper, they describe that the premise of bureaucratization has this amazing potential to undermine freedom of the individuals working within them, undermine creativity of the individuals, and undermine the personalities, wiping away what it is to be a person, what it is to be human, what it is to be this healthcare provider if you are structured within a bureaucracy as you're practicing. So one of the first problems with bureaucracy, this paper goes on to say, is that there is no decentralization of decision making. And what that's being said is that the people who are making the decisions and designing the protocols are not on the front lines. They're not sitting there with the patients. They are too removed from the interpersonal conversations and interpersonal experiences from the patient to make the procedures and protocols effective. And the only way to really have effective procedures and protocols is if you're able to make those small changes on the spot. If you have this workflow that exists by someone who designed it in a corner office, not every patient fits that workflow, but because a bureaucracy forces you into this particular way, good decisions can't be made, not because you don't know to make them, but because you're not allowed to within the confines of the bureaucracy that's been put upon you. And that contributes to burnout, knowing that there's something you should do or could have done, but can't because of a policy. And again, here, this is an example of it. Whereas a person in heart failure needed to go see a different doctor, but last here, on this last of this highlighted thing, on the basis of heart failure flowchart, the care was perfect, right? So they followed the protocol perfectly. But in terms of the actual patient's needs, it was ineffective and inefficient. And that doesn't entirely make sense if we believe that bureaucracies are solely designed to make care effective and efficient. And this happens all the time. I'm sure people can think of examples where they're trying to do crown, and maybe you can give an example from dental school, in so much as there's a crown whose margins have affected the biologic width, and now there's inflammation and probing depths. As a dental school, because the perio department takes all the probing depths need to be perfect before phase 2 is created. A crown is phase 2. So what that means is this patient needs scaling and root planing, maybe surgical intervention by the perio department before that crown can be removed. But it's clinically obvious that the crown is what's causing the periodontal condition. So a physician or a practicing dentist would recommend removing the crown and replacing it with a different crown and fixing the biologic width invasion. But because of the protocols and procedures that are in place at the dental school, that's not what happens. And I'm sure there's a number of examples that other people can think of as well. And here, this last sentence here, what I was just talking about is a dissonance between serving the policies, making sure perio is done before phase 2, and procedures of a bureaucracy and serving the health of the patient. It's almost as if you're treating the policies and procedures more than you're treating the patient. Now, I actually really love this example because as a teacher, as somebody I want to teach in the future, and as teachers who are listening to this, there were these feedback papers that needed to be submitted, but they weren't necessarily submitted in a timely manner. So there was a deadline imparted. Now, with the deadline imparted, all the submissions weren't on time, but the quality of the submissions decreased because the incentive of the person writing the submissions was no longer to give good insight. It was to make sure you hit submit at the right time. And that's terrible because on paper, the person who put this policy into practice, the person who said submissions are late, we need to get them in on time, he accomplished his job. But the bigger picture is those feedbacks and those reviews were supposed to have some weight behind them. The purpose of the reviews aren't to submit them on time. The purpose of the reviews are to have powerful feedback within them. But because of this deadline imposition, this bureaucracy that surrounded it, yes, the objective was met to have the submissions in on time. But the reason these submissions were created in the first place has been lost to this bureaucracy. And again, that echoes back to the decentralized decision making I was speaking about. Somebody who's not necessarily involved in that workflow doesn't entirely understand the timeline that exists to make these procedures. They see that submissions are late. Well, that's a problem and we need to correct it. But they fail to see what the negative externality is from adding those deadlines. Okay. Now another example, I'm sure we could go on for example, but a quick one we could say is an office manager came in and a surgeon or dentist really enjoyed spending time with their patients. And the practice manager was told the person she needs to pick up her speed. She didn't like it, she retired. Now, the practice manager, whose job it is to increase revenue, did her job. She added a physician that was faster and generated more money for the practice. But the surgeon was in direct conflict with that because she's the one who's putting her license on the line. She's the one who takes all that risk. She's the one who takes not just the financial risks, the professional risk, but also the personal risk. And I don't think this is mentioned enough, but when you operate on somebody, when you do a procedure on somebody, the risk you are taking on, I contend it's personal, because we all went into this field, into healthcare, into medicine, into dentistry to help others. And when you take on that risk of intervening surgically to help them, you run the possibility that they are potentially worse off after you've helped them than before. And that's a huge personal weight you have to carry around. And I'm sure that's what this surgeon was attempting to explain and connect with and explain to their patients. But the bureaucracy that she was working within did not let her assess her risks appropriately and explain her risks appropriately to these patients. And I think that's unfortunate and very tragic, because the whole system is predicated upon providers. And if we wanted to, I contend that if we wanted to, we could run everything. If we really wanted to, we could do everything ourselves. But we have outsourced these certain responsibilities to others to maybe make things more efficient. But in so much as doing that, it's almost gone to a point where we've lost the essence of what it is to be a dentist, what it is to be a surgeon, what it is to be a physician, because we've outsourced all these responsibilities and they've now been taken away from us. And I have an uncle who's an orthopedic surgeon, and he always used to say to me, medicine is run by MBAs, not MDs. And I didn't used to agree with that, but especially now getting through dental school and looking to residency, I understand exactly what he's saying. So, and this paper concludes with saying bureaucracies in their very nature and the healthcare professions exist in tension. Bureaucracies are trying to standardize everything, while patient interactions have the potential of being endless. patient presentations are innumerable, and the possibilities and the combinations they present are endless. And being able to confront and talk about and acknowledge the tension between bureaucracies and the provider is an important mitigation in attempting to decrease burnout. Because if we saw one patient a day, would that cause burnout? No. If we saw two, no. If we saw three, four, and at whatever number you feel comfortable with seeing, that's how many patients you should be seeing. But where the burnout happens is always on the back end. It's the note writing, it's the insurance policies, it's the pre-authorizations, it's all that details that cloud the treatment of the patient. I would imagine any surgeon, any dentist's dream is to just see patients every single day and not have to worry about writing a single note, not have to worry about submitting pre-authorizations, but just sitting there and being completely present for that moment, for that patient interaction, so that you're able to help them and treat them appropriately without the cacophony of noises that so much surround what it is to treat patients. So to conclude, I want to touch on a number of points that I thought this paper brought up really well. And it's a great paper. It's a really good read. I recommend that everybody read it, because maybe you're in a situation where you have this bureaucracy that's ruining the art of medicine and dentistry for you. And this can be a great paper to read and learn some talking points and learn how to articulate in a concise way the conflicts that you're experiencing to your boss or to the office manager and of the source. But I think the first point we can talk about here is decentralized command. Whereas the people in the higher up offices, they are creating policies and procedures that affect people, we'll call them on the front lines. And a way to combat this is not for the people who are higher up to go completely hands off and say, okay, you guys do your job. It's actually for the people up higher to ensure that the people who's working beneath them on the front lines, we could say, have maximal amounts of training. That way they understand the end goal, the end mission of what's trying to be accomplished. And so that way they don't have to follow a standardized regimen. They can make individual decisions based on their own experience, based on each individual situation, that are moving toward that mission that we're all after. If you have a protocol put in place, it denies any chance of variability. It denies any chance of creativity, of personality. But if you have well-trained individuals on the front line that are capable of making independent decisions in support of that larger goal, that's a good way to have decentralized command. Now, a problem of bureaucracy is that it's increased depersonalization. And this makes you feel like just a cog in the machine instead of this creative, vital individual that many healthcare providers are. I love that example that the paper brought up about deadlines, where the tactical goal, the small scale goal, was to get these submissions in on time. But by doing that, they missed the bigger picture. They missed the value in what it is to take your time and to write a well thought out review. If a person gets their review in May versus April, does that really mean a lot, as long as they're getting a good, thorough review? And there's also depersonalization in that, and I think, and I don't know exactly where this began, but there's this urge to document because people will be litigious against you. And I understand that. I understand you want to protect yourself and protect your license and protect your practice. But that, what I just spoke about, document in case people are litigious against you, is the complete antithesis to what it was and what it is that we became healthcare providers. We didn't become healthcare providers to make sure people don't sue us. We became healthcare providers to help people. And I don't exactly know how to backtrack from where it's gone, but I understand that exists. And I think finding ways around that in your practice, whether that's hiring a scribe or having an understanding or making sure you really explain everything before operating on or performing procedures on certain patients, I think it's a shame that that's the way that it's gone, but it is. And defense attorneys make a living defending practitioners, and prosecutions make a living prosecuting practitioners. And that's unfortunately the way that modern medicine works. And we'll echo back on this third bullet here. Healthcare is run by MBAs, not DMDs or MDs. Now, compensation. This circles back to the point where the office manager and the surgeon were at end about how much time she should be spending with a patient. That office manager has no risk in anything that happens on a patient. The surgeon risks everything. Every time they operate, they risk their license, they risk their financial well-being, they risk their job. And I always add this fourth risk in that there's a personal risk that's involved, in that they know that if they perform this procedure, it may not work. And they might, and the person may be worse off than when they started. And that's a huge personal risk. That's a weight you would carry with you. And to say that providers make too much money or dentists make too much money, I don't think. How much money would you want to make if you knew that every time you do something, the person may be worse off than you are? And I think if, as providers, if we're able to think about that, thinking that what we're putting at risk every time we treat a patient is so much larger than people give it credit for. But unfortunately, the people who make those decisions about how much people are getting paid or how much insurance covers, they have no risk. Every time they touch a patient, good or bad, they still make money. Whereas us, we live with those consequences because we went into this field to help others. And if we come up short of that, that's a risk, a personal risk, a intrinsic risk that we feel. And another thing I always found interesting about this is how much DMDs, dentists, DDSs, and MDs, without them, there is none of this. There is no bureaucracy. There is no healthcare litigation. There is no insurance companies. Without the providers, there's nothing. So I think I just find that it's interesting that all this burnout tends to come from the outside. Whereas if every physician quit tomorrow, nothing would happen. Whereas if the insurance company quit tomorrow, the providers still have that knowledge, still have that skill set, still have everything they need to treat patients. And honestly, they'd probably have less headaches because there'd be no insurance company there trying to beat them down and tell them no, procedure's not covered. Now, and this final point here, it's more of an incomplete thought, but we'll explain it as best I can here. And I have here that bureaucracies are built to standardize procedures for the long term. So much as that as people come and people go, the train keeps moving, right? You know, people can come in and out and they're replaceable. But because of the bureaucratization and the standardization and the depersonalization and the lack of individuality that is forced to exist within that system, I would contend that over the long term, over many, many years, that process that was put into place to make things run well as people come and go, actually over the long term, will fail as a business. And the reason why I say that is if the experiences of the providers that are working there are poor enough, if the experiences of the patients that are being treated there are poor enough, the market will decide that this is not a place to go to, because the bureaucratization, it may be perfect. Every T might be crossed and every I might be dotted and every policy is polished to the nines. But if that means the bureaucracy is so stifling that the providers aren't happy working there, if the patients aren't happy being there, over the long term, that institution will cease to exist. Now, the reason why that doesn't happen is because patients and providers, I think, are thinking in many times on too short of a time scale. Imagine a young dentist graduates and they want to make some money and they begin working for a DSO. They're working on a 3 to 4 year time frame. They're thinking, let me get mine. This may be really tough right now, but since this won't be my existence forever, I can put up with it. And when that person moves on, that organization is able to take another young dentist for 3 to 4 years and continue to move on. But if providers operated like everything they're doing, they're going to be forced to do forever, I think there would be an extremely different way that dentistry is run. Because if you knew you had to exist in this work setting forever, you would make sure that there's changes. But because you know that down the line you're able to get out and then it's somebody else's problem, you don't bat too many, you don't bat too many eyes. You don't make too many ripples in the water. You're just trying to get yours and get out. And I think that's a real negative, and I think that's something that needs to change. And as far as why patients don't, why that won't also happen on the patient side of things is many times patients are captive audiences. And they can't go anywhere else. There's this reality of geographic isolation or monetary isolation, whereas they're in this, or they could even be in a healthcare desert where there's only one or two institutions or insurance companies that will cover the procedures they need. So they're captive. And therefore, it's not a true free market in that they don't get a choice. They have to be there, because if not, they won't get the care they need and they'll pass away. And I think that same kind of thinking that I was speaking about on the provider side happens on the patient side as well. They think, well, I'll just do this here now and I'll move on, and this is not the eternity. This is not going to exist forever. And I think that's a terrible outlook, and I think that needs to be something that changes. And I really encourage everybody to read this paper. It's a really short read. It's 3 or 4 pages, but it highlights some amazing points, and I really recommend you guys check it out. It's in the Journal of Radiology. It was written by a few radiologists, but I think this paper has widespread consequences, and if just a number of people read it and talk to their supervisors and the people that are making the bureaucracy, I think it can have some real impact. Thank you.